All right, so it looks like there's some news coming out about Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. Now, Clarence Thomas is, of course, an extremely right wing Supreme Court justice. He's very well known. But there is some information, some pretty bombshell information coming out about Clarence Thomas, and it specifically has to do with his wife, Ginny Thomas. I've definitely seen news even prior to this news cycle about his wife, but his wife seems to be like a QAnon type of lunatic, and so that brings its own scrutiny. But this is actually starting to get to a really, really big deal because it has to do with the January 6th, failed coup or like insurrection attempt. And so what has actually come up is apparently his wife was speaking to Republican members of Congress and other groups, telling them to essentially take part in these protests, right? In these Capitol protests, in essence, being part of this attempted coup. And the issue actually comes in that Clarence Thomas actually has voted on, and he voted no on a case that allowed, the government to get records in the investigation, the January 6th investigation from President Trump, getting those records. He actually was the only no vote. And so the problem becomes when you are somebody who is in power, let's say you're a judge or someone like that, typically you're supposed to recuse yourself from the situation because you have a clear conflict of interest. That is essentially a form of corruption, right? Your own family member, your vote is specifically going to impact that family member. You have not disclosed those ties and people didn't know those ties. And so that is why progressive lawmakers like AOC in this example are calling on him to either resign or face impeachment. I believe that Ilhan Omar also had called for his impeachment. So this article says, Rep. AOC on Tuesday called on Justice Clarence Thomas to resign or face impeachment for what she depicted as a pattern of ethical breaches. Clarence Thomas should resign, she wrote on Twitter. If not, his failure to disclose income from right-wing organizations, recuse himself from matters involving his wife, and his vote to block the January 6th commission from key information must be investigated and can serve as grounds for impeachment. And so this is a serious issue. Now, can Justice Clarence Thomas be held accountable for his wife's personal opinions or even personal actions? Should those be reasons that he would be barred from the Supreme Court or any justiceship in general? I would say no, at least I don't think right now, because you can't really control like family members' opinions and stuff like that, so I don't think I'd be in favor of that. But the issue here is, this is a clear conflict of interest. That's just another form of corruption. You're voting on a case with your stakes of protecting your own family members, specifically from an investigation into this January 6th failed coup, and it's not disclosed to the public. Nobody actually knows. And so it's like this secret thing. That is totally an ethical breach, absolutely. And so it says, Ocasio Cortez just the latest in a series of Democratic lawmakers and legal experts to intensify ethical scrutiny of Thomas in the wake of explosive reports last week that exposed his wife's aggressive efforts to help overturn former President Trump's electoral defeat. Those revelations raised fresh questions about the justices' refusal to step aside from related cases before the Supreme Court, including at least 10 rulings concerning the 2020 presidential election, without any indication of him recusing. The ruling that has drawn the sharpest criticism came in January, when Thomas was the only justice who dissented in an 8-1 ruling that cleared the way for House investigators probing the January 6, 2021 insurrection to obtain Trump-era White House records. So, it says his vote attracted renewed attention last week after it was reported that in the aftermath of the 2020 election, Thomas's wife, Virginia Thomas, exchanged dozens of text messages with then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows that appeared to show her strategizing over how to bypass the will of American voters to install Trump for a second White House term despite his loss to President Biden, an outcome she described as obvious fraud and the greatest heist of history. The revelations have prompted growing calls for Clarence Thomas to recuse himself from future cases involving disputes over the 2020 election and January 6th insurrection. Others, like Ocasio-Cortez, have gone further in calling for Thomas to resign or be forced off the bench through impeachment. Supreme Court justices, unlike judges on lower federal courts, are not bound by a code of conduct and are permitted to decide for themselves whether recusal is appropriate. So it's very interesting here that you see that the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, that makes these landmark decisions that determine, case law and just law in general, are held to a lower standard of ethics than lower federal courts. Now, obviously, anytime you're proposing any kind of Supreme Court reform, it becomes, very questionable and debatable, and it's a very sensitive issue because you're trying to maintain the Supreme Court as an apolitical body as much as possible, as, you want to keep the judicial branch as independent politically as possible, and so it makes it kind of difficult in that realm. But it is really sad to see that it's held to such a low standard. But, seeing as though he refused to actually recuse himself from that case when he's essentially voting no with the conflict of interest of protecting his wife, of which nobody really knew about, is certainly an ethical issue, absolutely. And this is an issue where, oh, like he has this, conflict of interest. Is this going to impact the future of the January 6th Commission, cases? He's not even going to recuse himself from that. Clarence Thomas is an extremely stubborn human being. I'm sure all of the, good Supreme Court justices are, but Clarence Thomas, I don't even know if, does he even ask questions during the court cases? So I think generally he already has his mind made up. But, this is a definite serious, absolutely serious issue that needs to be investigated because this is a Supreme Court justice. He could be and will be, voting on these very important decisions that can determine our elections and who ends up getting elected. And so if he's going to use this kind of conflict of interest, he is somebody that should be removed, and certainly not recusing himself from these cases is a huge, huge, huge ethical violation in the judicial court.